And by the time we got to the middle of our home, the second bomb hit.
It was the beginning of a movement, and we walked together.
The armies don't carry out those plans.
Dedication to the rights of all.
The Reverend A.D. Williams King was born in 1930 to Dr. and Mrs. Martin Luther King Sr. As a young man, A.D. married Naomi Barber. During this time, A.D. accepted the call to ministry, graduating from Morehouse College in Atlanta. Reverend King pastored 4 churches, and because of their preaching styles, A.D. and his brother Martin were often termed the Sons of Thunder. A.D. is credited with organizing the Birmingham, Selma, Louisville, and St. Augustine, Florida civil rights activities. Daddy King was the first to publicly express the belief that both of his sons were murdered for their civil rights activities. Meet Mrs. Naomi Barber King, wife of A.D. and sister-in-law of Coretta Scott and Martin Luther King Jr.
It was May the 11th, 1963, a Saturday before Mother's Day. I had prepared my dining room table with all of my finery and getting set for, Mother's Day the next day, and was feeling good, about the preparations and everything. And my husband was back in the bedroom working on his sermon. And so after I had finished decorating the table and all, I went and I sat in the living room on my sofa, and there was a picture window directly in front of me. So I was just sitting there, and it was about 11 o'clock in the night, 11 o'clock. And I was just sitting there, just meditating and enjoying the quietness. And all of a sudden, I looked at my picture window, and I noticed it had begun to crack. I didn't hear anything, I didn't see anything, but I noticed my picture window begin to crack. And simultaneously, my husband came up from the bedroom, and he came up and he opened the door, the front door to our home, and he looked up the street and down the street, and it was so quiet that you could hear a cotton ball fall. It was so quiet. And when he did that, he came over and took my hand. He said, "Naomi, let's get out of here." He said, "Because it's too quiet about here." And by the time we got to the middle of our home, the second bomb hit.
The security folk who went over to the house to sort of stand guard, but it was really too late because the bombing had taken place. Ironically, no one was killed. We just was blessed.
Behold the Dream, Brother to the Dreamer, introduces you to the Reverend Dr. A.D. Williams King, little-known giant of the civil rights movement.
Martin Luther King Jr. believed in nonviolence. He did love his neighbor as himself. Because he was mortal, this belief was not a gift. It was a philosophy which grew from study, self-discipline, and prayer. As he achieved this way of life, so can I, and so can we all.
I would hate to have been A.D., put it like that, with a brother named Martin Luther King Jr. Because he had his own position, and he was his own person, and people knew that. But the world didn't recognize a lot of that. They didn't recognize it in us. It was Martin Luther King Jr.
Anybody would say that A.D. was not committed to the movement, they didn't know anything about the movement. A.D. was was one of the leaders in the movement. He was a strategist. He was an architect. He was a warrior, activist. AD was somebody and who said that did not know AD. AD was a warrior. At the same time, he was a loving and a kind brother. Great preacher. The people gravitate to him.
I'm happy for two reasons. One, I would love to see my father get some credit for all the sacrifices he made, because he gave up a lot, went to jail a lot on his own. And I think that it would be good for America and the world to see what he was able to accomplish with the help of God in his own right.
Like his brother and other members of his family, was deeply committed to end segregation, end racial discrimination. AD was very self-confident, strong, and solid in his own right.
You know, he was more radical than what you would think, because we met at a church right down the street from here, and we had a rally, and he had us to march down the street, and right in the middle of the intersection of 4th and Broadway, which is a busy, busy street, 4:30 in the afternoon, and had us to all sit down in the intersection, and we stopped traffic all ways. AD was kind of a person who could bring people together, and that's what he did. And he went to Purdue University, was able to lease their plane, their football plane, and we took a load of Kentuckians to Selma. He was on the picture with the governor when he signed the bill into law, which was the Kentucky Civil Rights Act in 1966.
I served as executive director of the Kentucky Christian Leadership Conference when Reverend King was the chairman of the board. Reverend King was a constant recruiter and the most prolific recruiter for the demonstrations. He went through the churches. He organized the Kentucky affiliate of Sclc, known as Kentucky Christian Leadership Conference. And he went to youth groups. AD was a strategist in his own right of tactics to be used during the civil rights movement. He was an excellent speaker, a good preacher, and a good pastor. I think his major contribution was that he did as much as possible carry out the same attitude and the same commitment that his brother had. I don't think AD ever really sought the limelight. He was in Memphis when his brother was killed. He didn't seek the limelight. I think he was always there and ready to do his part. But it was just not his personality. Now, to seek a reputation.
AD was just as important as ML. They were brothers, and they were full blood brothers. I mean, they were brothers all the way. He was as dedicated to that civil rights movement as his brother was.
AD's role was as important as Martin's role. They were brothers, and AD knew that he was not Martin, and Martin knew that he was not AD. Martin knew the campus. Martin knew the corporate boardrooms. Martin knew how to walk around with the intellectuals. AD, however, majored in the people of the streets. AD knew the people on the street. He knew how they felt. He knew that. Plus, they would follow him. He could corral them. And most of all, AD had a gift with leading children. AD could rally children around the civil rights movement, and Martin depended heavily upon AD. His insight and the reasons that we are doing it are more important than pain, more important than setback, more important than failure. If things didn't move today, we'll be back tomorrow. If things didn't move tomorrow, we'll be back the next day. If they didn't move on Friday, we'll be back Saturday. So number one, training. And who's eligible, who has the kind of character, who has the kind of faith foundation that can do those kind of things. The way AD made me feel, AD made you feel like you could do anything. AD would say, come on, let's do this. He said, well, and AD said, come on, let's do it. We got to do this. We can do it. That was his spirit. And that was about everything across the board. We can do this. I can do it. I need for you to do this. I can't do this without you. Come on, let's do this. He made us stretch in a comical way. And at the time, you didn't know that was happening. But as I look back on it, reflect upon it, that's what he did. He made us all stretch in AD's way, AD's gifts and AD's talents. And we're all plugged into that. And that's what made AD a great man. And the movement owes a great debt. They should never forget A.D. King. I know I won't.
He was a sleeping giant that was never given the credit he should have been given.
I don't think he ever met a stranger in his entire life. And he had a way of relaxing people. He had a great sense of humor. A.D. recruited ministers and pastors into the movement that many people don't know about. Dr. King, Daddy King at Ebenezer, Dr. William Holmes Borders at Wheat Street Baptist Church, the late Reverend Joe Boone, Reverend Greer, the Reverend Dorsey, all of these, the Reverend B.J. Johnson, all of these persons were recruited to walk with and stand with the students. Moments in history when the power of nonviolence was operating to the extent that the jailer was apologetic for carrying out his duties. Of course, one could say not unlike the jailer in Philippi many centuries ago, who said to Paul and Silas after the jailhouse was shaken, "What must I do to be saved?" And I think maybe at the core of our history, America might be raising the same question today. What can we do to be saved in the 21st century?
You have to take a look at the faith. You have to take a look at the courage of this man. A man that pastored an African American church. A man that just didn't think that African Americans had to be free. He thought that poor whites, he knew that poor whites was in the same boat. He wasn't out there just marching for us. He wasn't out there marching just because his brother was M.L. King, because he could have stayed comfortable at home. He could have stayed with his family. He didn't have to make the sacrifice that he made, and still living here in Louisville, still taking the abuse from some of the Louisvillian so-called friends. But he was a man of courage. To not to have known A.D. is a mistake, a terrible mistake for our children. Not to know right on that corner, 22nd, what is now Muhammad Ali Boulevard, was pastored by a very brave and courageous man, Reverend A.D. King, that sacrificed his family and himself
And then when he went home, he had to, into Georgia, he ran into other errors in his life. It was heartbreaking. It was very heartbreaking. But you miss something when you talk about all the other great heroes and you miss AD. Because a lot of churches, a lot of ministers in this city was afraid to open their doors when Dr. King came. He sacrificed. He opened his door. They blowed the doors off of his church. He never stopped.
This cover shows a picture of me to the very far right. My head is just in the front of Dr. Rev David Abernathy, and I'm standing right next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and of course his brother, Reverend A.D. King, and right between them is Reverend Fred Shellsworth of Birmingham, Alabama. This particular march, I want to believe it was in Selma. I believe that's where this march was held. I think his strategy was what most of our strategies were, and that was support his brother. He supported his brother. Whatever his brother wanted him to do, wherever his brother wanted him to go, he was there. He never tried to usurp any of the limelight. As was said on so many occasions, most people didn't even know Dr. King had a brother. A.D. King was very much involved in the civil rights movement. I know for a fact he marched in Zebulon because I was there with him. I know for a fact that he marched in Monroe and Social Circle because I was there with him. I was not with him in Kentucky, but I have a very close friend of mine in the civil rights movement, J.T. Johnson, who marched with Reverend A.D. Williams when they boycotted the Kentucky Derby. The only time that the Kentucky Derby was ever boycotted, and A.D. Williams was right there with his body on the line, along with J.T. and others. So people who say he was not involved, and wherever Dr. King asked A.D. to go to speak or to lead a march, he did it. So the only thing I can say to those who say that he was not involved in the movement, they don't know the history of the movement.
A.D. was a very generous and giving person. And you have to consider, it was a difficult thing to be the brother of Martin Luther King. He handled it so well. As you know, they got along great. He was an icon in his own right and cared about it as much as any of us, And I'm grateful that you're doing what you're doing that will open up other doors that people can look into and see the life and times of these brothers, not like Cain and Abel, but like Martin and A.D.
You see, we must remember, Martin wasn't killed because of civil rights, or human rights, segregated. He was the first black person in the history of America that got in a position to determine public policy. And that would not be tolerated. And so when we looked around one day and they said A.D. was killed, it was tragic to me because I knew him. I knew his kindness, I knew his politeness, I knew his niceness, and no envy. You can have brothers that can be close and still have a lot of envy. There was none of that. And he was always there for not just King, but for the movement. And he was doing things in Louisville that makes Louisville what it is today. You know, Reverend Coleman in Louisville wouldn't have been able to do the things he was doing had A.E.D. not sit up there. And so I just say one day, well, he don't have to be validated by nobody. You know, there's a universal order that his name is in the book. And that's all that counts. You got presidents whose name will never be in the book. You got billionaires whose name will never be in the book. Wherever the book with the decent lamb in it, he'll be there. And so I just say to him, I see his children, and as I go backwards and forwards across the country, and I just think about him. I don't think about him enough because we're so busy ripping and running. But when I looked at this picture here, this is him. Okay, I don't know how many pictures they have. This captures him. It was that smile, that look, that dignity, that honor, and he demanded respect, you know. And so again, I just say, you know, the truth will come out one day. But just thank God he was there for Martin. Because you see, when close friends of Martin jumped him, you know, hey man, don't do this here, he could always call AD. Or AD will always find him and be there, not because he was there for the movement. I'm here for you, brother. Yea, do I walk through the valley. See, if you look at the Jews in the wilderness, they was in the wilderness. There's a difference between being in the wilderness and through the wilderness. When you walk in the wilderness, you never come out. When you walk through the wilderness, yea, do I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. I rod my staff, and may goodness and mercy. Now here's where I ended. I said, if I had one wish with AD, I would make him walk behind me. Why? So my 23rd Psalm will say, may goodness and mercy follow you all the days of your life. He was goodness and he was mercy. And to be followed by that, you make my 23rd Psalms come true.
That danger and death were lurking in the shadows, and we never knew when and where it would strike. But I think he was able to deal with it in such a way that it did not suppress his full participation and exposure in the struggle.
He was under constant threat. People were continuing to say, we got your brother, we're going to get you. And he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign.
I'm telling him, Lord, when I go out to South View, when I go out there now, both of my sons is in almost right together. I've got to look at one, look at the other. Lord, make me strong enough to take it, but I've already told him I'm not going to live out there, Lord. And he's not out there, and Emma's not out there. Dust to dust, and ashes to ashes, earth to earth is out there. They're not there. I'm not starting to live out there. I ground my faith in God. So I have left yet something that you can't take away, still left with me, faith, hope, love. I'm not going to let myself stoop low enough.
There are many mysterious circumstances surrounding Reverend A.D. King's death.
I look out the bedroom, I see a body in the bottom of the pool. Once I concluded it was Daddy, the other thing I looked at, he was in his underwear. So I come back up out of the pool, wake Vita up, tell her Dad is drowned. Then that's when the telephone started. She started calling whoever she started calling. I woke Al up. Things got chaotic, but I made sure that when they pulled his body out of the pool, I was there. I know what I heard, and I ain't gonna dispute nobody, I ain't gonna debate nobody. The emergency worker said, ain't no water in his lungs. He was dead before he hit the water. And I said, what?
Most disturbing thing to me, how a drowned man didn't have no water in his lungs.
There is no doubt in my mind that the system killed my beloved husband, the Reverend A.D. Williams King. I heard about the death of my beloved husband while in Jamaica, just ending a beautiful vacation where my husband, two of our children, Mrs. Coretta King and two of her children had just ended a beautiful vacation, 2-week vacation. And my beloved husband had left on Friday to come back to Atlanta to be in the pulpit on Sunday morning. So on Monday morning, while we were packing, getting ready to leave Jamaica, I received the call that my husband had drowned. When I got to Atlanta and deplaned, my first and only thought was to get straight to the funeral home and see my beloved husband, the body of my beloved husband. So I went straight to the mortuary and looked at my husband. When I got there, I just could not believe, first of all, that he was dead, he was gone. So I stood there, and then there was his body all covered with the sheet. So then I just pulled the sheet back so that I could look at him and see for myself, you know, that he was not a breathing, living soul anymore. And as I looked at him, on his forehead there were bruises, and then at his neck there it was very dark and looked like there were like rings. It was very dark. And then I just could not believe what I was seeing. You know, I just could not believe that. So in a state of shock, I just lost it.
Many people at the time that my father, Reverend A.D. King, died, expressed doubts that it was accidental. The very first reports, they tried to say that Dad had committed suicide.
Elder Bernice King reflects on her uncle, Reverend A.D. Williams King.
I know he kind of served as a surrogate father for me and my siblings when my father was assassinated in April of 1968. There was a swimming pool in the backyard. And of course, at that particular time, I was a little afraid of water. I was only 6 years of age, and Uncle A.D. was a very good swimmer.
It's good for us as a family to kind of reflect back on this. I mean, we've lived with this and we've known it, but it's good to kind of pull it off the shelf.
Here's what Dr. Christine King Ferris has to say about her two brothers.
They believed in the cause. They were really to do anything, you know, to do the ultimate, but they were determined and committed to a cause, and they were willing to pay the ultimate price.
Something I admired about A.D. and the way he handled the notoriety of his brother, and of course he's not in the limelight as much as his brother, but he always worked with his brother, cooperated with him, and always projected him as much as he could. That said something to me about the character of A.D., in that he functioned in the sort of in the background of his brother, and his brother got all of the attention and notoriety, but yet A.D. was very faithful, he was very committed, very dedicated, and he was a strong advocate of civil rights, a love for people that was outstanding. And he also had a strong sense of right and wrong, and his devotion and dedication to the civil rights movement was unprecedented.
There are many mysterious circumstances surrounding Reverend A.D. King's death.
We have never done for A.D. what we did for Martin King to find out about his murder, to examine every detail. That must be done with A.D. And until it is, we will not be fair to A.D., nor to the movement, nor to the concepts, nor to the Christian ministry, or to his family.
Well, A.D. was in the middle of everything because he was Martin Luther King's baby brother. And for instance, when Martin went to jail in Birmingham, there were only about 4 or 5 preachers that went with him, but A.D. was one of them. He was at every mass meeting. His church was one of the churches that ended up as a headquarters, not only for voter registration and for demonstrations, but for training young people. So he was right in the middle of all of the movement activity and one of the real leaders.
We had been arrested around noon, between noon and 1 and this kind of thing. So Reverend King Sr. came into this big open cell block, right outside the cell block. And he said, he was a bail bondsman. And so he said, I'll sign for A.D. King, Otis Moss, and Albert Brunson.
There would be no possible, as we're filming this black president, had there not been an A.D. King, had there not been these men and women who were willing to lay their lives on the line for economic justice, integration of public facilities, educational justice, housing issues, job and employment issues.
And here again, I'm very proud as an African American of what Barack Obama has achieved. But I'm not prepared to sit here and say that, and he did get overwhelmingly, he could not be president without getting overwhelming white votes.
Nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And nothing is more frustrating than to try to push forth an idea whose time has not come. So we've talked about running for political office. Here we are in 2008 talking about electing a black president. I mean, sure enough, we have one party, the Democrat Party, has offered the nation a choice between a woman and an African American. That's tremendous progress. No need to talk about that 10, 15 years ago. That wouldn't have happened. And so you have to play them as they hand them to you. I heard a fellow say today, play the hand you're dealt. So many times we can choose, but most of the time we have to play the hand we're dealt. And I'm proud of the fact that we have people like A.D. and others in the movement who gave their lives and their capacity for thought and perspective and vision to the movement. We're much better off, and we owe them a great debt.
His installation as pastor of Ebenezer occurred in November of '68. And he hit the ground running in terms of his work here at the church. He was greatly involved with the establishment of the Children's Chapel. He identified a person by the name of Mary Manuel who took leadership of the Children's Chapel, which he was very passionate about. And today it is named in his honor, the A.D. Williams King Children's Chapel. He also established a television broadcast for Ebenezer in conjunction with the WAGA Channel 5. He engaged the services of his sister, Mrs. Christine King Ferris, to direct that program. Reverend A.D. Williams King also served as an assistant pastor after his ordination Before he was called to the Mount Vernon Baptist Church in Newnham, he did serve as an assistant pastor at Ebenezer. Here we see the Reverend A.D. Williams King at his installation banquet. The main speaker of that banquet was the Reverend Leo Lesser Jr., which I understand from Mrs. Naomi King was a very good friend of Reverend A.D. Williams King.
Spirituality was pivotal to the civil rights movement.
Spirituality played a tremendous role in breaking down these barriers and Jim Crow laws. You had to have something deeper than, I mean, we couldn't have paid people to do what they did if spirituality had not been a part of it.
Because of their collective faith, the movement became a spiritual movement and a force of monumental dimension.
It was very deep. That word, the second word in the name, Christian, had it not been for our Christian faith, we would not have been able to accomplish what we did. And notice I said Christian faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
You know, the Birmingham movement, the Selma movement, it was like a children's crusade. The young people went to jail. And I tell you, without the black church, there wouldn't have been a civil rights movement. You can say amen. Amen. You can say amen. Amen. The movement came out of the church, and it's so appropriate to be meeting here in this chapel named for Martin Luther King Jr. And without the music of the movement, without the music of the church, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. And I tell you, without the movement, without the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. and A.D. King, there would be no Barack Obama as President of the United States of America today.
He said that I want this nation to know that we are a Christian people, that we follow the teachings of Jesus Christ. He punctuated everything that he spoke about, reminding people that this is a movement led by the Spirit of God. It's a movement led by the Spirit of Christ, that Christ is the head. He punctuated it. He always used the example of Christ, and that was consistent, you know, throughout the movement with, you know, even all the members of our family. It came out of the church. I mean, it was led by these men, you know, and Uncle A.D. was very supportive and very involved with Daddy in the movement.
I don't think it's any secret that Dr. King was a preacher, a God-called preacher. I don't think it's any secret that A.D. was a God-called preacher. Dr. King founded Sclc, was his first president. I don't think it's any secret that the civil rights movement met in churches when they couldn't meet anywhere else. I don't think it's any secret that rallies were held in churches around the country whenever inspiration needed to be given or information needed to be given or money needed to be given. Because the church is where the people were. It's where the people are now. And so when you talk about the leader being a God-called preacher and the movement moving through and by the Spirit that's in the churches, and which means people, you gotta sort of feel like this is not something that's man-made, that this is of God. It's the way God is parting the Red Sea. You know, it's the way God is bringing the bones together from the valley. It's God's doing, it's God's business. If we ever take the power of God's Spirit out of SCLC or out of the civil rights movement, it's dead. It has no power without that. That was its foundation. That spirituality has always got to be there. And the church is going to have to play its role. And the leaders are going to have to be spiritual. And God forbid that you try to put that the spirit and the spirituality with just intellect or the academics. There's got to be a good mixture, but the bottom line has got to be the spirit. We got to believe that God is with us. No matter what happens to us, God is with us. God is going to bring us out. God is going to deliver us. Now, without that, you can't trust in man and what man will do, because man is like the wind blowing. It's blowing one way in the morning, another way in the evening.
And all I can say to you all that don't know AD, what a man, what a man, what a mighty man.
He claimed his death by war. One was enough, two they couldn't stand. That's why they got rid of God's preacher man. Just the system still the same. How your courts won't take the blame. Segregation ain't true. Listen. God moved in his spirit, get up and move on. Before they got to the back door, a big blast